Yeah, Mia. She was doing double duty today. How y'all doing? Good. A few, one correction to that announcement. We actually had to bump AMP groups one more week, so they won't start the week of the 18th. They're going to start the week of the 25th. So just kind of keep that in mind. But I'm not going to waste a lot of time here because we have a lot to cover this morning, and you know how I can get. So we're going to just get moving if we can. But one thing I do want to say is that we are having the after party. That sounds weird. The go away party after service. It is an after party. It's after service. So it will be at Ballantrae, and we're going to spend some time there from 12 to 4, just saying goodbye to some really good friends that have been with us for over 10 years. Which is crazy. So, we will join together there in Ballantrae. We hope that you will join with us. But anyway, let's jump into it. We are in a series called Running with the Giants. And last week we ran our first mile. We ran our first mile around the lap, around the course in the stadium with Noah. And we had a lot of interesting things that Noah wanted to share with us. And in this series, just to give you a reference point, is that what we are doing is we're running a lap every week, a mile lap with a hero of the faith, a biblical giant, if you will. But with that being said, even though we're focusing in on these Old Testament larger than life names like Noah and Moses, which we're going to be looking at today, and some of these people, we have to keep things into perspective. And that's the point that I wanted to kind of say. We are looking to see what their story tells us about God, not what we learn more about them. Right? Because if we learn just more about these heroes of the faith, not that those things aren't important and not that they can't help us understand how our faith grows and how to lean in and obey God, but if we fall short of seeing what it tells us about God, then we have missed the mark. We have missed the point. Okay? So that's important. God is the main character of their story. Hence, God should be the main character of your story. Right? And so because of that, it is about him and what he does in and through us. This series is really built around Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. Hebrews 12, 1 through 3 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and sin that so easily entangles, and let us run." There you have it. We're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And it says there in Scripture, and that we are running. We're running a race with perseverance, the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. One thing that we pointed out last week was that faith is about endurance. Faith is about endurance, obedience, and trusting in God. And so when you think of running and you think of marathons, you better understand a little bit that is in people who understand what endurance is like. You need to have endurance when you're running that length of time for that many miles. Faith is about endurance, obedience, and trusting in God. Again, we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, and each week we're just going to have them step out of the bleachers and onto the track with us for one lap, 1 mile, to tell us a little bit of their story and who God is in their story. You know, the older that you get, you tend to want to tell stories. Right? The older that you get, you have more time on your hands. But it's not that you just have more time on your hands, you have a lot of life experience that you want to impart and you want to share. And so as you sit down and as you get older, you want to sit down and you want to tell those stories. You want to tell your story. You want to tell your story about the challenges and the triumphs of your life. You want to tell the stories of your love and also loss, the love and loss in your life. You like to tell stories of families and friends. You like to tell stories of faith and endurance. So as we look at all of these stories, one thing that I hope that you will see not only in their life, but you will see in your life as you begin to think of your story and those triumphs and those challenges, those love and that loss, those families and those friends, and that faith and endurance. I hope that you will find, much like we will find in here, is that woven within those stories are stories of God. They're stories of God and his protection. They're stories of God and his provision. They're stories of God and his presence. They're stories of God with his patience. And they're stories of God that gives purpose for redemption. So that is what I hope that we will see as we lean in a little bit. Okay? This opportunity to listen, to learn, and to lean into God's story as we run another lap with Moses. We're going to run another lap with Moses. And in Hebrews chapter 11, 24 to 29, I told you I wanted to jump right into this. Hebrews 24 to 29, chapter 11, gives us a snapshot of Moses' faith. And so this is what it says. It says, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. And by faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. Moses' story spans over 4 books in the Bible. 4 of the 5 books that we call the Pentateuch, okay, the Pentateuch, think of Penta, right? 5 books, the first 5. Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moses' story spans over Exodus to Deuteronomy. So there's 4 books. So we have a lot to cover in 4 books of the Bible this morning. So anyway, I say all that to say is that is the Pentateuch. The Jewish tradition would refer to these 5 books as the Torah. That's right, the Torah. And the Torah is actually Hebrew. It translates teaching or instruction, because the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy not only teaches the Jewish people their history, but it also teaches them and shows them the instruction of the law. And so that's why these 5 books have to do with teaching and instruction. And so, again, Exodus to Deuteronomy is where we're going to be this morning. And again, we don't have time to comb through 4 books, large books of the Old Testament, nonetheless, okay, in one sermon. But we'll try to hit some of the more important lessons as we go here. And for starters, I think the one thing that I just want to mention that I think Moses would at least lean in a little bit and tell you is that Moses should have never made it past infancy. He should have never made it past infancy. Moses was born a Hebrew in Egypt during Jewish captivity. Now, to set that up, prior to Moses' birth, Israel was living a pretty good life in Egypt prior to Moses' birth. Actually, with the Pharaoh before, if you know the story of Joseph, not Joseph, the father of Jesus, but Joseph, the Old Testament Joseph, then you would know that Joseph helped, who was a Hebrew, he helped Egypt get through a famine, okay, and get through a wasteland of 7 years of famine. And he helped them through that. So Pharaoh gave freedom to the Hebrew people to live, and they prospered, and they grew in number, and they began to make their lives there in Egypt. It was a good life for a good amount of time when Joseph was there and that Pharaoh was in control. But prior to Moses' birth, a new Pharaoh took over. And he wasn't too keen about how prosperous and how well-to-do the Hebrew people were doing in Egypt, and he decided to enslave them and make them his slaves and brought them under captivity, and that enters when Moses is born. So that kind of gives you a little bit of history there and just helps you understand that there was prosperity and goodness and good things happening, and they were increasing in number in Egypt, but that all came to a screeching halt, and it all changed when he got into power. And so what happens here is the Pharaoh issued an order, the new one, issued an order that all Hebrew babies that were born, boys, were killed. Well, actually sent out to the Nile to be killed, put in the Nile to be killed. And so we see that in Exodus 1:22. It says, then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So that was, he was enslaving the men. He was enslaving the Hebrew people, and he was trying to get rid of the men. It was for this reason that Moses' mother, Jochebed, hid Moses from the Egyptians for 3 months. For 3 months, she hid him. She had him, and she hid him to spare him and to give him life. But however, she knew that she couldn't hide him forever, that eventually someone's going to find out. And so what happened was that she devised a plan. She was going to make a basket and put Moses, a 3-month-old Moses, in a basket and put him in the reeds along the bank of the Nile. But she also gave her daughter, Moses' sister, clear instruction and said, watch out for him. Watch and see what happens to your brother Moses. Sure enough, the Pharaoh's daughter comes down and finds a basket with Moses in there, and it says that she felt sorry for him. But seeing that he was 3 months old and he needed to be taken care of and he needed to be nurtured, what took place is Moses' daughter, I'm saying it wrong, Jochebed's daughter, Moses' sister, was right there to greet the Pharaoh's daughter and said, do you want me to go get a Hebrew that can nurse and take care of this child? She said, yes, go ahead. So what does she run back and do but to get Jochebed, Moses' mother, to come and to nurse and take care of her son underneath the protection of Pharaoh's palace, Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh's, household. So Moses is spared through that. Speed that up a little bit, that's what happens. But in the first quarter mile, Moses would say this: God has a plan for you. You are here for a purpose. Moses would let you in on that. He would say, listen, I was as good as dead. I wasn't even supposed to be here. But God has a plan for you, and he has a purpose for you. And as we see in Jeremiah 29:11, he says, Jeremiah said, that the Lord said, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Declares who? The Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and plans to give you a future. Yeah. God has a plan for you. You are here for a purpose. And that's something Moses would say. Listen, it doesn't matter what's happened in your past. That's what Moses would say. Your past is your past. You've seen Lion King, right? When Rafiki hits him, put the past behind you, hits him in the head, right? You know what I'm talking about? If you don't, watch it. It's a good movie. But it doesn't matter about your past. Listen, the obstacles that you faced, the diagnosis that you might have had, bad upbringing, good upbringing, foster homes, adoption, absentee parents, abusive homes, neglect. Listen, I'm not saying, hear me out, I'm not saying that those things are not significant or they're not overwhelmingly difficult to overcome. I did not say that. I know that past hurts. There's pain in the past. I understand that. Moses would understand that. Moses, which you don't know, but if you do know, you know the story, that eventually Jochebed had to kind of give up Moses. Eventually, she was no longer needing to take care of him anymore. He could take care of himself, and Pharaoh's daughter could take care of him. So eventually, she kind of had to phase out, if you will. And she just kind of had to give him over to the Pharaoh's daughter to spare his life. So our past is not always pretty. It's not always great. But God has a plan for you, and here you are. And I'm not saying that all those things are not significant and they're not overwhelmingly difficult to overcome, but these things should not define you. They shouldn't define you. Your past should not define you. You're not damaged goods. You're not worthless. You are a child of God, and he has a plan for you. He loves you, and he is for you. Don't ever forget that. That's something Moses would tell you. Listen, I may not even made it this far. Had my mom not protected me, had things not go, did it go perfectly? No, it didn't go perfectly at all. His mom had to give him up, but here he is, and he could tell you, God has a plan. Moses was raised as an Egyptian, not really as a Hebrew. He was raised in the palace of the Pharaoh, but he always remembered his Jewish roots. He knew where he came from, and his loyalty was to the Hebrew people. And as we round the quarter mile, headed towards the half mile, Moses would say, be careful when your confidence outruns your obedience. Be careful when your confidence outruns your obedience. One could say by looking at this, Moses felt that he could save the Hebrew people by force, one Egyptian at a time, if you will. He could do it one at a time. He killed an Egyptian who was beating a fellow Hebrew. Let's look at that account. Exodus 2, 11 through 15. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? The man said, who made you the ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. So when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by the well. Be careful when your confidence outruns your obedience. What Moses would find out is it wasn't God's timing. It wasn't God's timing. It wasn't God's timing for the Hebrew people to be vindicated. It wasn't their time for them to become free. It was not God's timing to deliver the Hebrew people from the Egyptians. In fact, it wouldn't happen for another 40 years from that point. That they would still be in captivity and they would still be enslaved. See, this event, hear me out, this event caused Moses to have to flee for 40 years to Midian. Now what good is he to the Egyptians? Well, now what good is he to the Hebrew people? He has now been moved out of fear for his life where he could be of no help to the Hebrew people in Egypt. Now he was in exile and wanted for murder. So had he wanted to do anything for the Hebrew people, now it's that increasingly more difficult because he's no longer in the Egyptian palace. He no longer has influence. He no longer has a way to look at Pharaoh and his daughter and help them come to a different agreement. None of that can happen now. He's gone. He's fled. He is on his own. See, sometimes the confidence we have in our own abilities and the things that we think we can do prevents us from being patient with what God is doing. You can see that interwoven into this story. Now, I'm not saying that God was going to use Moses in the palace of Egypt to free his people, but he could have. But now there's 40 years removed from anything of happening of that nature. And so what's happened here is our confidence in what we think and our own abilities, we resort to our ways when God's ways seem to be slow or not producing our desired results. I think every one of us at some point in time could say, I'll just do it myself. I'll just do it and I'll do it this way because it gets it done. But are we looking to God and are we saying, God, what is it that you want me to do? God, let me take a pause for a moment and let me reflect on you. Let me ask you, how do you want me to proceed? Because a lot of times we trust in our own abilities, in our own wisdom, in our own understanding. But it's in times like that we must remind ourselves of what it says in Isaiah 55, 8 through 9. It says this, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, declares who? The Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are your ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. The point here is that many times what we think is the best route, God has a different path. God has a different path. and a different solution. We're going to get to that as well in a few minutes. But we resort. What are some of the ways that you have been confident in your in your own? Yep, that's why I put this up here. I was having trouble this morning. I was like, man. What are some of the ways you have been confident in your own abilities to fix things that God may be saying, trust him? Trust him. Listen, I understand this. I have to live with this all the time because I'm a fixer. I'm always wanting to fix things. I'm always wanting to fix people's situations and make sure everything is good and everything is right. But sometimes God says, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing this and doing that and doing that? Why don't you just sit back and let me do a little bit right now? You're kind of trying to fix things, but you're making it worse, right? You think you're doing well, but you're really not. And so that sometimes happens because his ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts higher than our thoughts. And so we need to understand that. We need to realize that God's timing is perfect and he knows what's best for you. You can see this interwoven into Moses' story. I told you, we have 4 books of the Bible. We cannot get through all of them. So we're hitting some of the things that God was, as I was reading this story this week, and as I was looking at all the things that was going on for Moses, there's a lot there. But he had to flee for 40 years. He had to flee for 40 years. Why? Because there's a faith lesson that can be learned in that moment. Good intention without God's timing can lead you straight into exile, can lead you into a desert land in your own life. It can lead you to a place that God never meant for you to be in. Good intentions without God's timing can lead you to places that you were never meant to walk, that you were never meant to go. And it might take months, it might take years to get back to what God wanted to do in your life. 40 years for Moses, for God to bring him back to do what he was planted in Egypt to do originally. Now, we don't know. I'll be honest. We don't know if God had a plan to put him in Pharaoh's household to take over, not to take over, but to convince and to use his influence to bring freedom to the Hebrew people. But had that been God's plan, it was 40 years removed because of an act of, instinct, whatever you want to call it, to kill that Egyptian. As we round the half mile, we're headed to the 3/4 mile turn. See? We're running. God can grow you in the waiting. Just because he was exiled to Midian didn't mean that God wasn't doing something in his heart and wasn't doing something in his life. There's one verse that I want to call your attention to that as I parked on that in Hebrews, I was like, what? This doesn't make sense. But as I thought more about it and as I looked a little bit more, I was like, oh, okay. So the verse is verse 27 of Hebrews 11. It says, by faith, this is when he left. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. You may say, didn't we just read that he fled because he knew that that Pharaoh was out to kill him? Yes, we did read that. And for good reason. He wanted to spare his life. But I would submit that the writer of Hebrews is not referring to when he first fled. He's referring to what happened over the 40 years while God was still working in his life during that exile. That somewhere God grew him in the waiting. God grew him in the waiting because what does it say? It says that he persevered. He persevered through those 40 years. That fear that he once had when he was running, he didn't have it anymore because God was doing something in the waiting, in that time frame between when he left to when he was called back, what we're going to look at in a minute. God does something in the waiting. Moses' eyes became fixed on God in exile, and the fear subsided. And he persevered because he saw him, God, who is invisible. God does things in the waiting, in your low moments, in the times where maybe you've gotten off course. God is still there. He is still wanting to work in your life. He is still wanting to speak into your life, and he's still wanting to grow you. Sometimes we go through seasons so that God can grow us, so that when we come out of it, we can be stronger for it. Amen? That we can be stronger to take it head on, to see what God is doing, and to look back. Remember, I said when we can look back at our story, when we can look back at our lives, we could say, I saw God woven through that. I saw his protection, I saw his provision. Even though I might not have seen it then, in the moment, I saw it later. It became clear where it once was unclear. That's what God does in the waiting. You can say the waiting, that exile, could have been a form of discipline. We don't like the word discipline, do we? We don't like to be disciplined. But look what Hebrews 12 says about discipline. Look what it says. It says, God disciplines us for our good. We don't like discipline, but it's for our good. God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in his holiness. And this is why no discipline seems pleasant at the time, right? Discipline doesn't seem pleasant at the time, but painful. But later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Moses was in a season of discipline, but also in a season of growth, and even for a season of righteousness. A season of righteousness. Godly discipline produces righteousness. God is working even in the midst of the valley. We read that last week. Therefore I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me. I just became King James all of a sudden. I don't know. It's how I remembered it. It's how I memorized it. That's why I have it. So we're rounding the 3/4. Godly discipline produces righteousness. Guys, we're getting there. I'm sorry. As we round the 3/4 mile mark, Moses says, God provides solutions to all your excuses. That one's going to sting a little bit. That one's going to sting a little bit. God provides solutions to all your excuses. What does that mean? God removes every legitimate reason or an excuse a person might claim for not obeying him, not trusting him, and not responding to him. Very quickly, 3 examples. And this all happened at the place that many of us know, we've read about, the burning bush, right? The burning bush. At the burning bush, when Moses, after that 40 years of exile, you know what's interesting? I didn't say this, but Moses was a shepherd. That's what he was. He became a shepherd in Midian. He maybe wasn't a shepherd in Egypt, but when he was Midian, he was a shepherd. And he was out, and he was tending the sheep, and he saw a bush that was being consumed by the flames, but it was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. Let me put it that way. It wasn't burning up. And that sparked his interest and piqued his interest. That's what I wanted to say. But it piqued his interest, so he went over to see it, and then that was this encounter with God. And Moses repeatedly offers excuses, and God repeatedly offers solutions. First one, Moses says, who am I? Basically, what God is saying is, I want you to go. It says it right here in Exodus 3:11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? That's 40 years removed, guys. 40 years removed. That was 40 years ago. I haven't been back there. And who am I now? I am a nobody. I'm nothing. I can't do that. Get somebody else. Who am I? I can't do this. Listen, these are things that we say all the time when God asks us, but me? No, not me. Not me. But God says his response is the solution. I will be with you. I am who I am. You keep asking the wrong question, who am I? He said, who am I? No, God is saying, no, I am who I am. So you're good. That's the solution. What does he say? Verse 12 and 14 of Exodus 11. And God said, I will be with you. So the solution, who am I? Doesn't really matter, Moses. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm going to go with you. So you're not going to be alone. I'll be with you. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. I am has sent you to you. Who am I? Wrong question. God's saying, I am. You get it? God's saying, I am. So it doesn't matter who you are, I am. I will be with you. So, first excuse, first solution. Second, Moses, what if they don't believe me? What if I go there and they don't believe me? Look at what he says in Exodus 4:1. Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Well, what if I go there and say, hey, God, I just had a conversation with God at a burning bush, by the way, and he said that you needed to let my people go. Yeah, right. You and what army, right? It's just you. So what do you want us to do? I'm just going to give in like that because your God told you, right? He says, what if they don't believe me? Pretty good excuse. Fair? Fair? Yeah, we have good excuses too. But God says, solution. He provides signs and authority. He'll provide signs and authority. Exodus 4:21. The Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. I'm going to provide you with signs and authority and wonder. It is my authority that is going to be going before you. So they'll believe you. It might take a little bit convincing. If you know the story, it does. But they will believe you. Eventually, he will believe you. Listen, God brought many signs through Moses. Through his staff, right? You know some of those. His staff turned to a snake. He had his hand turn into leprosy and then clean, right? All those things, the plagues, the many plagues that came. All of these signs, all of these things that happened, the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea. Eventually, Pharaoh will believe that Moses was sent by God. It just might take a little bit of convincing. But the reality is that we can have that excuse is, what if they don't believe me? It's not it's not your job to convince them, Moses. It's mine. Hear that? It's not your job to convince them, Moses. It's God's job. I will take care of that. All I need you to do is to be willing and obedient to do it. Stop with the excuses. I have every solution, and I will continue to give you solution after solution. So Moses resorts to this. All right. If nothing else works, disqualify yourself. I am slow of speech. I can't do it. I'm not your guy. I'm not your guy. I'm slow of speech. Here's my reason. Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Exodus 4:10. I may have shared this before, maybe not, I don't know. But when God called me to be a pastor, that was my worst fear, was public speaking. My worst fear. And I was just like, I can't speak in front of people. I can't do it. Yeah, I still struggle with it, by the way. You might say, yeah, you're like, well, you don't. You talk a lot in front of people. But I do struggle with it. I struggle with it, and a lot of times what people, and I'm going to call myself out here, and you might know it, it's very hard for me to make eye contact when I'm preaching. Very difficult. That's one of the things about public speaking. They say, got to make eye contact. It's very hard. I look there at that back wall. I look there. I look there. I look over here. I make it look like I'm talking to a big crowd, because I keep spanning the crowd. But it's very hard for me. It's still hard. But I still rely on the Lord to help me in all of that. And again, not patting myself on the back, but I was obedient to do pastoring because he called me to be pastor. And he said, I will take care of it. I will take care of you. I will, you're going to be nervous sometimes. You're going to get up there and you're going to rely on your notes a little bit too much. All of those things are going to happen, but it's okay. It's not so much how it is or what it is. I mean, not how it is, but what it is. It's the message, and it will be clear, and I will use you, and I will help you. And that's what God has done over the many years that I've been doing this. But Moses had the same excuse that I had. I can't do that. I can't do that. It's too much. It's too big. It's too big for me. But God provided Aaron to speak for him. He still provided a solution. Still. I want to say hesitantly, but you can see, and you'll see what I mean. In Exodus 4:14, it says, "Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. And he said, 'What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you guys. He's already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you.' I'm already working this out, Moses. Aaron's already on the way. You're going to do this, okay? And I'm just going to keep on giving you solution. You got anything else for me? I'll have a solution for it. You got anything else to throw my way? Let me know. But I have things under control. Just trust me." You see, that is the reason. God provides, that is the reality. God provides solutions for all of your excuses. When other excuses don't work, when those things, when you say and you disqualify yourself, when God says, "Hey, did you ever think about working with children?" Not me, I can't do that. But is God saying that to you, or are you saying no? Is God saying yes when you're saying no? No. But the reality of it is there's a lot of times you say, I can't. Well, maybe God's saying, but he can, and he can use you. God says, I can, and I can use you. So let me use you. I will find a way. I get it, though. As I've already shared my own story, it's rooted in fear, isn't it? It's rooted in fear, like, can I really do this? Is this, I don't know. But faith isn't the absence of fear. It doesn't say that you'll be able to do things for God when fear goes away. Faith isn't the absence of fear. It's obedience that moves in spite of that fear. It is moving even when it's scary. It is listening and it's obeying even when there's fear. And as we approach the finish line, Moses will say this: God is patient, he's relational, and he is faithful, even when people are not. I didn't even write this in the message, so now that's going to get more than I wrote. That's bad. That's scary. God is patient, relational, and faithful, even when people are not. A lot of times people look at God's people as reasons as to why that's not for them. Christianity's not for me. I've met enough Christians that, they put a bad taste in my mouth. I don't think I've ever met a person that hasn't sometime wronged you or wronged me or said something stupid or whatever. I mean, we're people. We're not perfect. That's the point. But the thing is, when God is patient, relational, and faithful, even when people are not, we're looking at the wrong person. We're looking in the wrong direction when we're looking at Christians to help us to see who God is. That's why I said, listen, we need to look at the stories and see who God is in these stories, not who these people are, because these people are flawed. They are human. They mess up quite a bit sometimes. And so what Moses would say here is God is patient, relational, and faithful even when people are not. He would tell you about the time that while they were wandering in the desert, they were free from Egypt. He would tell you about the time where they were like, can we just go back to Egypt already? He would tell you that. Can we just go back to Egypt? At least we had 3 courses of meal a day. At least we had a roof over our head. Can we at least go back and do that? That's what it is. God is patient, relational, and faithful even when people are not, because people will sometimes just tuck tail and run and be like, nah, not for me. I'm good. Right? And so that's what's happening here. And what is taking place here is that he's going to tell you about that while they were in the desert. You know what else he's going to tell you? He's going to tell you about the time that when he went up on the mountain to meet with God, and he was talking with God, and God was giving him the commandments, that when he came down, the people had already made and crafted them a golden calf that they were worshiping. That's what he would tell you. He was like, he brought you all the way out of here, and this is what you're doing? What is going on? And Moses would also tell you of a time that he would tell you of a time that he himself, that when God told him to speak to the rock for it to provide water for the Israelites, he struck it instead with his staff because it had worked before. You understand? Are you following me? That at one time, God told him to strike the rock, and it provided that. But this time, God told him to speak to the rock, and he was like, nah, not doing that. I'll just, this worked last time, I'll do that again. God is patient, relational, and faithful, even when people are not. Now, that act of speaking to the rock, of hitting the rock rather than speaking to the rock, that act would keep Moses out of entering the promised land. Would keep him out. That one act of disobedience would keep him out of the promised land. Because God had told him that because you did this, you will not be able to go into the promised land with the people, with the Israelites. Now, God was still faithful to the Israelites, the promised land, and the covenant that he had made, because he under the leadership of Joshua, they would eventually make it in because of God's faithfulness. Not because of man's faithfulness, because of God's faithfulness, they were able to go in. But Moses would tell you that God is patient, he's relational, and he's faithful, even when I wasn't. Now you might say, well, shouldn't Moses kind of have a little bad taste in his mouth? I mean, he did a lot, and he didn't get the prize at the end. Like he did enough, don't you think? But he didn't get the prize at the end. But when I look at Deuteronomy 34, 1-6, at the end of Moses' life, he doesn't get into the promised land. But God is still with him. God is still with him. Let me read it. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all the Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah, as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, and far as Zor. Showed him all the land that the Israelites were about to take over and about to have. And then the Lord said to him, this is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Bethpeor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. Why do I end with Moses' death and this kind of like, yeah, there it is, but you're not getting it? Is that what God was doing? I don't think so. God was with him. God was allowing him to see the fruits of his labor. He was allowing him to see that it was he who did it, not Moses who did it. That God was still going to provide a pathway for them, even in spite of his disobedience. But there is an important lesson to be learned here. That God was with him to the very end. That's one. God let Moses see that he had helped what he had helped to accomplish. This was evidence of God's mercy and his grace, not a, stick it to you. It was his mercy and it was his grace that revealed that to him. So I think the last thing that Moses would say in light of this, that I think that maybe we need to hear, is that God is more concerned with your heavenly dwelling than he is with your earthly dwelling. I think he's more concerned about your heart than what you are going to obtain in this world. Moses may not have been able to make it to the promised land of a victory here on earth, but you can bet your bottom dollar, yes, I just said bet your bottom dollar, that he was able to enjoy eternity in heaven. which is more important? Which is more important than to say, but I worked so hard for this. I just want this. I really, really want this. But God says that's fleeting. That's temporary. I'm more concerned about your heart. How are you doing, Moses? I'm here with you. I haven't left your side. Even though you disobeyed, and I told you you're not going to be able to make it to the promised land, but there's more to things than this life. There's more to things than here. And I'm right by your side, and I'm gonna be with you until your last breath. And then what I'm gonna take care of your body. This is God. I'm gonna take care of your body, and I'm gonna lay you to rest. And you're gonna be in eternity with me. Could that have been the moment that happened on Mount Oreb? Could that be what happened in this moment where God was just with him, just comforting him, not rubbing it in his face, but comforting him and saying, I know, Moses. But I'm still with you. I still love you, and I still care for you. Pursue the things of heaven, not the things of this world. And trust me. That's what God would say. And that's what I got out of that. But as the worship team comes forward, let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, I just pray right now that as we just marinate on some of this stuff that you have been marinating in my heart and speaking to me this week over these things, over this story. And Lord, we know you are faithful. You're patient, you're faithful, you're graceful, you're merciful. But Lord, sometimes we get fixed, our eyes get fixed on the wrong thing. Lord, may our eyes be fixed on what is right. On what is right and what is good and what is your plan, not mine. Can we trust in your good plans? The good plans that you have for our lives. The things that we don't see, the things that we don't understand. That it can still be good even if it's not how I thought or how we thought it should go. But it could still be good because it's what you desired and what you wanted. May you get all the praise and all the glory in everything that we do. We are going to mess up along the way, but if our hearts are right with you, if we know you as our personal Lord and Savior, we can spend eternity with you. That's the promise. Everything else fades away, but one thing remains: eternity in the presence of a holy, loving, merciful, and gracious God, in spite of our humanity. We love you, and we thank you, and we worship you. May we lean in to your good plan for our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Will you stand?